What's up, guys? Welcome to the SharkPod with your host, Luke Curry, and my brother-in-law, as ever, in Glenageary. We're still over Zoom. Mark Baker, how are you doing, Mark?
Good, good. A nice sunny morning in Glenageary, so no complaints.
It's been a wet week, so it's not been great for getting outside. A lot of TV watching, that type of thing. Today, we're very lucky to be joined by Brian Caulfield. Brian has been working in technology and VC for a long time. It seems like when I was looking at your LinkedIn. Your LinkedIn stuff. So we're delighted to have you here. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks very much. Very happy to join you.
we had a nice chat beforehand as well. We were talking about the type of listeners that we get on the SharkPod are people who are starting their own businesses, people who are trying to grow businesses. A lot of people as well, and so they're interested in figuring out, where do they get finance, how to kind of scale their business, all that type of stuff. So I think it's going to be really interesting to have a chat there. Maybe we could have a chat about how you kind of started your career and got into technology originally, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. So I suppose I originally am a computer engineer. I won't tell you exactly when I graduated, but it was a long time ago. And actually, I think the year that I started in computer engineering in college was actually the same year as the first computer science class in Trinity. So in retrospect, I suppose it was quite early, if you like, for a kind of a career in software. But I came from one of those kind of strange houses where, as a kid, we had an Apple IIe and a Sinclair, various Sinclair machines actually at home. So it was kind of something that was there from when I was pretty young, Yeah. After I graduated, I did a couple of years of postgrad research working on one of these European-funded research programs, and then very briefly had a real job working for a subsidiary of a Swiss multinational called Landis+Gyr. So I worked for them for, I guess, about 2.5 years. They found themselves in trouble, and they were either shutting or selling off any businesses that were non-core, and that was kind of the trigger to push me to sort of start my first business.
Okay, and it's just so interesting as well. We're talking about the first computer engineering degree. Now there's so much computing education going on all over the place. But when you were kind of applying for that, was that really, were people thinking, should you do something else? Did people know that it was going to be such a big industry? Was it a little bit of a risk being the first class doing this, or?
I have to say that for me, I never saw it as a risk in any sense. But to be honest, I kind of grew up in a generation where, if you like, anything other than going into the civil service or one of the big banks was perceived as being a risk. The kind of the low risk thing to do was to do the civil service exams when you finished school and do that, or, as I said, join AIB. Yeah. Ironically, and partly because of the impact that technology has had on banking, it's probably fair to say that that's not nearly such a low-risk career as it might once have been.
100%. Okay, so when you start your own business, was that in software, or was that in consulting? What was the business there?
It was software. There were a few things that myself and my colleagues in the Landis+Gyr owned business had been working on that we felt were interesting and had potential. So we really started the business with the intention of taking one of those and turning it into a product, because under Landis& Gear we'd essentially been a services business, and we knew we didn't want to be a services business. We felt the services business wasn't really scalable, so we wanted to become a product company. One of the big challenges at that time was that there was no early stage venture capital in Ireland. Indeed, there was probably no early stage venture capital in the whole of Europe. So for us at the time, we needed to finance the product development by doing services work. So, we did projects, for example, we had one big project with the Irish Naval Service, developing a knowledge-based system to help them to interpret fishery protection legislation when they were at sea. So we were doing projects like that, and essentially using that to finance the product development. And I think that was a tough thing to do then. I think it's almost impossible now, because I think the pace at which the industry moves is so fast that you typically can't afford to move that slowly, if you like. You need to go all in on your product development typically, or assuming it's a decent market opportunity, somebody else is going to get there before you.
So interesting as well. So it's kind of like, because there wasn't so much going on, there was no like you said, in Europe, there's no one going to come in and fund like a competitor trying to build that business at the same time, so you can afford to take your time. Do you remember when that thing started to change? Was it during the kind of Celtic Tiger years, where new money was coming into not seed, but maybe like startup businesses in Ireland and the UK?
I'd say a little bit before that. I would have said kind of mid-90s, I think it really started to change. And there were a couple of different, factors. I suppose, firstly, we were in the very, very early stages of what became the dot-com boom, But in addition to that, you also had, and I think this is a particularly Irish thing, you also had guys like Frank Kenny, who had worked with a venture capital firm in Boston for many years. He came back to Ireland with his family and set up a venture capital firm, but with very much a kind of a US model of venture capital. And in fact, we were probably one of the first kind of very early stage small Irish software companies to raise VC. We raised the enormous sum of 300,000 Irish pounds from Delta Partners in, I think it was 1996. And, that isn't even a decent seed round now, let alone a Series A. But I suppose for us, it was essentially a Series A. None of us had ever seen a bigger check, and I mean both the size of the physical check and also the number written on it. So we we got the check, and it was too late to bring it to a bank. So the whole team in the company went to O'Brien's in Leeson Street with this big check to kind of celebrate the big occurrence, which I kind of naively, I think one of the things in business is you often think, if I achieve this, it'll get easier. And usually those achievements actually just ramp up the pressure a bit,
So you guys, you've raised like we were saying, that's an enormous sum in that era, when we're talking about not having a lot of other options when it came to financing. What was the first thing you did with it? Because I remember I was working for a startup in Vancouver, And when we got our funding, the CEO bought a lot of beanbag chairs, a lot of a lot of like vending machines and stuff like that. There wasn't as much like focus at the beginning. It got better, but the first couple of months it was a little bit crazy. Were you guys was it before that kind of that side of the technology business where you guys are just plowing that into the product, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a different era. It was nowhere near as competitive in terms of the recruitment of talent at that stage. Although within a few years, it did become incredibly competitive. So from our perspective, I mean, on a personal level, I was actually able to start, myself and my partner my co-founder in the business, we were able to start paying ourselves a kind of a reasonably decent salary, not an enormous salary, but I'd gone from Landis& Gear were paying me, I think, 28,000 Irish pounds a year, plus pension, plus it was kind of reasonably comfortable, and I'd gone from that to 10,000, and had been sort of bumping along the bottom between maybe 10 or 15,000 as we tried to kind of to grow the business and to build the product. So venture capital it kind of enabled me to pay ourselves, if you like, a living wage to start with. In some respects, I suppose we were lucky that we'd been able to pay ourselves anything at all for the previous few years. There was no culture at the time of kind of going out buying beanbags or art to hang in the lobby of the office or anything like that. It did enable us to kind of move premises. We had been based out in Tala, and at the time it was very, very difficult for a sort of a small company to get a lease on any space anywhere. It's still a problem, actually. You were being asked to sign up for a 25-year lease and probably to put 6 months rent up front on the table as a deposit, and you'd all of that kind of stuff going on. So it meant we were able to move into the city centre, into a better location, which made it easier to attract talent. And it meant we were able to focus much more strongly on product development. And we did continue to do a certain amount of kind of services work, but we were really able to focus resources on building the product and starting to roll the product out to customers.
Brian, Dublin's obviously now is a hub for kind of tech companies, tech talent. Were you ever tempted at the time to leave Dublin and to go to the States or London or anywhere in Europe maybe?
The funny thing is that when I graduated, it was absolutely my assumption that I was leaving the country. It was in the 80s. It was, to be honest, a pretty shitty time in Ireland, a time when it literally was kind of you're lucky to have a job. And if I think of my peer group at the time, an enormous percentage of the people that I was in college with left. Some of them did go to the US, but in those days it tended to be, a lot of people going to work in Philips in Eindhoven, people going to work for Siemens in Germany, people going to the UK. And, my kind of thinking at the time was, I'm going to be going abroad. The only question is where. But then, I suppose as they say, fate took a hand. I mean, firstly, I did the postgrad research for a couple of years. I'd always been fascinated by the area of artificial intelligence and what at the time were referred to as knowledge-based systems. And there was this tiny Irish company, which was a subsidiary of Landis& Gear, that was kind of working in that area, and I was kind of headhunted to join them. So in a funny kind of way, I didn't have to give it too much thought. And, then I got married relatively young. I suppose by today's standards, I was 25 when I got married. And, that kind of changes things in that respect as well. So I've traveled an enormous amount from a work point of view, but always have actually lived here, I do remember the first time I ever went to Silicon Valley, and, I kind of, the big software companies at the time were still people like Ashton Tate and Borland and those kind of names. And in the AI space, there were companies like Golden Common and IntelliCorp, and I knew their addresses from the packaging of the software, the boxes the software used to come in, complete with paper printed manuals and so on. And, the first time I was in Silicon Valley, I'm sort of there, and it's like, wow, on Page Mill Road, and there was just this kind of sense of awe almost at being, in Silicon Valley,
And I wonder, does it still have that? Is it so dispersed now, or is it? If young people in technology went to Silicon Valley now, they still have the same vibe? Do you think, or is it now that was the real ground zero of all kind of technology in the world?
I think firstly, I think it is much more diffuse. I think there's still a mystique to Silicon Valley, and there's still a lure to Silicon Valley. And even if you look at kind of phenomenal Irish companies like Intercom, Owen McCabe went out to Silicon Valley very, very early after the foundation of that company, because he really felt that, in order to be able to access the right partners, to access the best talent, and in terms of kind of go to market, who were their customer base going to be, that was where the customers were going to be. So I do think there is still that lure. Personally, I think in a lot of ways the shine has gone off it. I think there are issues in terms of kind of a tech bro culture that can be quite corrosive. And I think, we're all aware of the housing issues in Silicon Valley and in San Francisco in particular. That has become much, much worse. It's incredibly expensive to live there. And it's very, very difficult, especially for a foreign company, to kind of recruit there. And sort of an emerging model for tech talent in particular is, you join a company, you get your allocation of options, you wait about 15 months until you get past your 1 year cliff, and then you join another company and you do the same again, and you build up a portfolio of small option positions, and you hope that one of those companies turns out to be Uber, you know. And unfortunately, that's driven a situation where, a half decent engineer is probably going to cost you $175,000 a year minimum, and they're probably going to stay for 15 to 18 months, So it's actually become a pretty difficult environment. And, so I think Silicon Valley will remain relevant for sure, but I think its kind of position as the kind of an A plus ultra of the tech world is probably in decline.
I think I might go over to Silicon Valley and start a recruitment business.
And there are some very interesting recruitment businesses out there already. So I'd say you'd find it quite competitive, shall we say, but nonetheless remunerative.
Well, I think yeah, Silicon Valley has obviously gotten extremely competitive in every single way. Is there a new Silicon Valley? Is it Austin? Is there anywhere else that maybe somebody would have a better chance of making it big?
I think the new Silicon Valley is remote, if you like. I hate to hear people talk about, Dublin being the European Silicon Valley, that kind of thing, because there's actually only one Silicon Valley, and it's a very, very unique place for a whole lot of reasons. So I think kind of styling yourself as the next Silicon Valley or the new Silicon Valley, I just don't believe in that. And I believe what economies need to do and what countries and regions need to do is kind of play to their strengths and really think about, what are the things that make us unique and give us advantages and really double down on those. But I think what we're going to see increasingly is great companies built primarily on a remote platform where you're able to hire extremely high quality talent that is kind of living in the mountains of Austria, and people who live in Brazil and they want to live in Brazil, but they still want to work for a great company. And I think that's going to be the big trend. Of course, there'll still be kind of major geographic centers as well, and I think China clearly has very much emerged in that respect in a number of areas. I think Europe has great potential because the quality of the sort of the R&D coming out of the universities is absolutely first class. We just need to get the environment better in terms of our ability to commercialize those innovations.
So interesting that you mentioned the kind of shift to remote work and building that company on that type of platform. One of my friends I was talking to him yesterday in HubSpot, and he's like a data scientist, and he is looking. So he's from Cork, and he's sending me stuff on daft.ie, and he said he's gonna buy this house down there in Skibbereen because he can do the same work, but be closer to where he wants to live. So I think the COVID lockdown really kind of shone a light on some areas where it's not as important to have people all in one place.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think of it, it's not just that we can work remotely, but for a lot of roles, there was a kind of a perception that you've got to be close to an airport. So, it'd be lovely to be able to live in Skibbereen and work from Skibbereen, but I got to be close to an airport. And I think COVID-19 is teaching us that probably a lot of the business travel that we did was in many respects unnecessary. So I think that's also going to kind of dilute the requirements to locate close to airports or, for everybody to be in an office together.
Absolutely. So
Brian, sorry, Luke, go ahead.
No, Mark, go ahead.
I'm just thinking. I've two daughters. They're 6 and 8, and they're big into technology, whether that's computer games or actually the PC and figuring out stuff, Photoshop, and they're really good at that age. What if they were to get and we're always encouraging more females to get into technology? What areas would you kind of recommend would be the kind of the best areas to kind of start focusing on for for opportunities, for jobs, say in the next 10 years?
I mean, firstly, congratulations, Mark. That's fantastic to hear, and that's, I mean, I think unfortunately that's an area which, in many respects, has got worse, not better. In my first business, when we were 10 people, 6 of those people were women, and that didn't seem in any way strange or unusual to me. I tried to hire the best possible people for the role every time I went out to hire somebody, and we ended up with 6 out of 10 being women. And I think that would almost be hard to achieve now, So it's really great to hear that your daughters are into tech. I mean, in terms of opportunity, I mean, the first thing I think is that technology is really going to kind of pervade everything. And, I would be an advocate of the idea that practically everybody should learn to code, And it's not that it's a little bit like learning a foreign language in school. I think it's kind of at that level. It's not that everybody is going to code for a living in the future, but I think being able to code is going to be an incredibly important skill, even if you're a doctor or if you're not working directly in the tech industry. In terms of where the big opportunities are going to be, I would say in technology terms, I think we're now in the sort of the start of a second wave of AI and data science, and I think that's an area where, if you like, the opportunity is a very, very long way from being played out. In terms of, if you like, sectoral trends, I think it's always useful to look at, how is the world evolving, and to think about what's that going to do in terms of, in terms of how the world works. So, I'd be looking at things like the aging of the global population. That's not uniquely an Irish or European phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon. And that is going to create both huge problems and also huge opportunities, So that will be everything from robotics to systems for remote monitoring of health, and we'll get to a point, for example, where, because of the number of elderly people in the population, we won't have enough young bodies, if you like, to deliver healthcare in quite the way that we do today. So, for example, in Ireland, there's a company called Akara Robotics, and they've been working on essentially a social assistance robot for older people in nursing homes. So you're going to see those kind of innovations, I think, become increasingly important.
Wow.
When you zoom out like that and you think about the big kind of, probably that's a humanity problem, right? So
yeah,
it's going to be something that, like Mark's I think it was a great question. I think the older girl is learning Python right now. She's only 8, so
yeah.
I think
Luke got her a coding book, so she's been working away on that. But I think it helps when they have an interest. It's hard to force an interest on a child, I have to say. Like they're not as big into football as I'd have hoped, but big into coding right now. Yeah.
You should get them to check out, and full disclosure, I'm an investor in this company in a personal capacity. Get them to check out Robotify, which is essentially a platform to help teach kids to code using robots. So they get to control these virtual robots, and
wow.
It's one of the things that kids just find that really engaging. So get them to check that out.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm personally kind of fascinated with the whole robotics and robots, and I think a lot of people are, just from movies going back decades.
Yeah.
Has it kind of turned out the way you imagined? The way maybe 30 years ago, what it would be like today? Are we ahead of the curve? Are we ahead of what you thought it would be? Has it changed dramatically
At
from
this
what
point,
you kind of pictured? Like, we don't have RoboCop or anything like that, but you know what I mean? Like, is it any way different than what you imagined it would be in 2020?
That's an interesting question. I suppose the first thing is that I'd be slightly unusual in the sense that I've been kind of engaged in the world of AI, like literally since the mid '80s. My final year project in college was essentially hacking the Prolog kernel to enable it to inference in a slightly different way. So I've been kind of interested in AI for a very long time, and I, I we are still so far from what's referred to as a general artificial intelligence that it isn't true. I mean, we can all park the robot overlord fears for a very, very long time into the future. And I think probably a lot of people at that stage would have expected faster progress in relation to AI that we've actually seen, because we did have, I'd say a kind of an AI winter for the best part of 30 years.
wow.
I think we're making great progress now, but I don't believe that we're making really material progress towards a general AI, an AI, if you like, that could fool you into believing it's a person in a real sense. Um, and by the way, I should mention that just because we're not going to have to worry about terminators anytime soon, that doesn't mean that there aren't risks and issues with AI, and we really do need to be very conscious of those. And one of the huge risks and concerns that I see is that if you have data that fundamentally embeds bias, and you're then training AI systems using that data, then effectively what you're doing is you're creating a system that kind of encodes that bias. And there have already been some serious and kind of damaging examples of that. So there are definitely challenges. I'm not one of these people who believes that we can just blindly do whatever without even thinking about the consequences, although I am a huge believer in the power of technology to solve great societal problems.
I think so. Regulation is obviously going to be hugely important. Just like in finance, how far on the kind of reg side have people kind of looked into it and put kind of things in place to keep everything safe and not getting out of control at an early stage, rather sooner rather than later?
So I'm a little bit skeptical about. I think it's so important with regulation to find the right kind of balance, and I think you can have all the regulation you like, but if it's not underpinned by the right kind of ethical principles in people and teams, I'm not sure that it ends up being helpful. And if I can give you one very specific example that of if you like, an unintended effect. If you look at the world of venture capital, it's almost impossible for an ordinary person to invest directly in a venture capital firm. or a private equity firm, you need to be deemed to be a qualified investor, and there's a whole lot of tests that you need to be able to meet in order to be permitted under the regulations to make that investment. Now, those regulations are there to protect people, and I absolutely understand that. But what they're also doing is they're disenfranchising people. They're meaning that, these type of investments that can deliver great returns are actually only available to a subset of the community. And that strikes me as wrong. The regulation designed to protect people is actually disenfranchising them. So I think it's so important that we kind of design those regulatory environments better than we're doing today.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting point, because I think what the outcome is of what you're saying, Brian, is that perhaps the people who are the qualified investors who are, I'm sure, I don't know what the tests are, but maybe they have X amount in the bank. They make, they've done this type of stuff before or something.
Yeah.
And I guess the whole thing with venture capital is that you have exposure to a big upside, but also obviously the risk as well. But does that mean that the people who are not qualified don't really have the ability to get involved with that type of upside? So they're never going to get that. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. They're effectively excluded from participating in those types of investments. And I think people overestimate the risk in venture capital, not from the perspective of an individual investment. Any individual company that you invest in, there's a high probability of things going horribly wrong and the company going out of business. But venture capital funds, they invest in 20 companies. And they invest in 20 on the basis that of the 20, 6 are going to go out of business completely. 6 will become what we call zombie companies, the living dead. The company continues to exist, but you're never going to get, a return on your investment. 6 deliver a kind of if you like, a decent return, maybe 3 times your money. And, you can kind of think of it in some respects that those 6 pay for the other 12. And then you have 2 that are, if you like, the kind of the fund returners, the ones that you make the big gains on. Now, the problem, of course, is that at the start, you don't know which 2, otherwise, of course, you just invest in those 2. But the risk is very much mitigated by the portfolio effect,
Absolutely. And so if we rewind the clock a little bit, and you had just got the VC investment, at that stage, were you thinking that this is something that you'd like to get into? Or were you completely focused on the software stuff? Or were you saying in the future, I'm like, this was a really interesting process, this is what I want to do later on? Or how did you get into the actual investment part?
So that's a great question. I would say at that time, at the time that Delta Partners were handing me the check, I had no ambitions to be in venture capital. But the guy who led the investment from Delta Partners at the time, this guy called Shay Garvey, and Shay is now one of the founding partners in Frontline. And, my experience of working with Shay on the development of our business was an incredibly positive experience. Shay had tools and techniques in terms of, thinking about the strategy of the business that I didn't have, and I found that very valuable. He had a network of people that I didn't have, so just as a trivial example, or not trivial, but we ended up appointing Jim Mountjoy as chairman of the company, and Jim would have been a reasonably prominent person on the tech scene in Ireland at the time. But I didn't know Jim personally, so the introduction from Shay to Jim was hugely valuable. And then, beyond that, we in kind of 1999, we went through an incredibly difficult time in the business due to something that was kind of external, but it had a big impact. And Shay behaved incredibly decently and supportively at the time. He was supportive of me personally, and without going into the details of the situation, it was so bad that kind of Shay recommended that I go for counselling, and I did go for counselling like twice a week for a period of time as we tried to kind of deal with this situation. And during that period, Shay actually invested more money in the company so that we could move to larger offices, because we needed, I think at the time, we needed $500,000 in cash to put down the deposit on these new premises. And I think Shay's partners were saying to him, "Are you out of your mind?" And I think his lawyers were saying to him, "Are you out of your mind?" But he was very, very supportive of the business. So I came through that experience with a very, very positive view on the relationship between, entrepreneurs and venture capital investors, and a very strong belief that it is a fantastic model for building great businesses. So, to be honest, if I was starting a new business tomorrow, I would want to have VC investors. I'd be very fussy about who they are. I'd be extremely choosy, but I would want to have VC investors. So after we sold that business, and I was due to stay with Trinitech for a couple of years, I was very interested in the venture capital model at that stage. I guess I kind of hoped that maybe Shay might offer me a job, but he was much too smart for that. But John Tracy from Trinity Venture Capital came along. They were in the process of raising a new large fund. At the time, it was the largest tech fund in Ireland. It was 140 million euros. And John asked me to do a couple of due diligence assignments. And in fact, the first was on a company called Havoc, which subsequently went on to be acquired by Intel and was a great success. And the founders of Havoc have actually founded multiple successful tech companies. So he asked me to do a kind of a due diligence assignment on Havoc initially. I didn't have the brains to realize that he was kind of just road testing me to see if I'd actually be any good at this. But fortunately, he then approached me and asked me if I'd like to join the Trinity Venture Capital team. And, I kind of concealed my excitement as much as I could while negotiating salary and all that kind of thing. And joined Trinity Venture Capital in 2002. And, here I am 18 years later, broadly doing the same job.
Pretty good. Interesting as well. Like, it was nice that he was kind of testing you out, but didn't tell you. That was kind of a shrewd move as well. Like that.
John is a shrewd guy. He's kind of semi-retired now, and kind of quiet and understated. Not kind of a showy guy, but I learned an awful lot from John.
And so maybe, I know believe it or not, we've been really moving through the time here. One of the things that we really wanted to ask you as well, I think it would be great to get your input on how would I put this? Like we had someone on a podcast last week who has a great business, and I'm not saying that he wants to do this or whatever, but let's say that he has 4 people working in a company. They have quite a you know quite a nice business going for 2 years. They're happy enough doing that. It could be scalable. It's profitable now in a small way.
Mm.
Do you think that at what stage would you suggest someone with that type of company should be looking for outside investment, or should they have been doing that at the beginning in their first year? And would they be, 5 times as big now? Do you know what I mean? What's the kind of triggers in your opinion?
So there's a couple of things I'd say about that. And the first and by far the most important, I think, is that entrepreneurs should build the business that they want to build, and, for the sake of argument, if you own a business that's, turning over 2 million a year, making $500,000 profit, and growing at 10% per annum, that's a damn fine business to own. And you're maybe giving good jobs to 10 or 15 people. That's something to be very proud of, and you're making a great contribution to your community and to society in doing that. That's of zero interest to a venture capital investor. But if that's the business that you want to have and that you want to build, then that's what you should do. And I think where things kind of often, if you like, leave the rails and we get into trouble, is when an entrepreneur is kind of saying to me, okay, so what does the business need to look like for you to be interested? I'm kind of thinking, we're actually having the wrong conversation now, because what's happening is that you're bending the plan for your business out of shape in order to make it attractive to me. And, where that often ends up is, maybe I do invest, maybe I don't invest, but you're now trying to kind of, if you like, execute against a business plan that you really don't believe in, So, I don't think external investment or VC investment should not be seen as a kind of an end in itself. It should be seen as very much a means to an end. So I'd encourage people to think very much about, what do I want to do with the business? What do I believe is possible? What's the plan that I would like to execute for the business? And then out of that plan falls the capital requirements, and then you start thinking about, okay, well, now what's the right route to financing that capital requirement? So, to go back to your original question, somebody might have a business that has fantastic scale potential, but they just don't want to go down that road, and that's fine. On the other hand, if you're targeting a very, very large market opportunity and you're ambitious to kind of capture that opportunity, and you believe that you have, if you like, a unique insight into that market opportunity, then I'd encourage you to think about raising capital quite early on, because, ideas, the world is not short of ideas. Ideas are 10 a penny, and almost every great market opportunity will be identified by multiple people in multiple locations, at multiple times, if you like. So it's very, very unlikely that any kind of major market opportunity is not going to be identified by multiple people and targeted by multiple people. So if you have that kind of opportunity, I'd encourage you to think about raising capital kind of quite early on, actually.
And when it comes to the human part of it, like when you're investing, or a VC is investing in a startup, there's plenty of things that they look at, plenty of characteristics. What about the founder? What would be the key characteristics of a successful founder, or a founder worth investing in? I'm sure you've plenty of kind of pattern recognition at this stage. Interested to know that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think for investors, the first thing actually is the market opportunity. Like, is this a market opportunity that's really worth going after? The second thing, absolutely, is the people. And there's actually kind of quite a long list of things that you want to see. I mean, firstly, you do like to see some kind of unique, differentiated insight into that market opportunity. You love to hear a founder saying, here's where everybody else is getting it wrong, and this is why we think we can win in that market opportunity. So you love to hear that kind of insight. Secondly, you want to be backing somebody that you believe, you believe you're going to be able to have the right type of relationship with. So you want somebody with, that you believe has very high ethical standards, somebody who's coachable. You'll hear VCs say that a lot, and that doesn't mean somebody who kind of takes everything that you say as kind of the tablets of stone delivered from the mountain, but somebody that will listen, argue the point, but kind of take on board advice, and not just advice from the VCs, obviously, but advice from the team. So you want somebody who's coachable. And you want somebody who's compelling, because great businesses are built by teams. So you really want somebody that you feel is going to be able to recruit great people, and there's, the old sort of saying that A-class people hire A-class people and B-class people hire C-class people. I totally believe in that, so you really want somebody who's going to be kind of sufficiently compelling as a personality to be able to attract the best talent. And then finally, I think a degree of self-awareness is hugely valuable. I think a lot of founders, sadly, remain running their businesses at a time when they should have hired somebody else to run their business, because typically people who are really good at getting something started, that's actually quite a different skill set to managing a large business from an operational perspective. And I think very few people are actually able to successfully make that transition. And a lot of people should think harder about sort of saying, actually, you know what, my skill set is all about starting stuff and getting something going. And, that's a different skill set to organizing and structuring and managing a large team of people.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think the why of like why they're doing it, do you think that makes a big difference along the way?
That's actually a really great point, and I should have mentioned that. I mean, I think great entrepreneurs are nearly always passionate about the problem that they solve. I do a kind of a presentation from time to time where I've got like 10 thoughts on innovation, and one of them is that kind of innovation requires grumpy people. An awful lot of entrepreneurs are the kind of people who look at something and they sort of say, I cannot believe that's so shit. There has to be a better way of doing that, and it's that kind of motivation, that sort of God, that's crap. There's got to be a better way, and I'm going to find the better way. And sometimes that's obviously a social problem that they're trying to fix, or something that's that's kind of really going to deliver for people and for society. It might be something to do with global warming or whatever, but sometimes it's just a commercial problem, but you do like to see entrepreneurs who are really passionate about the problem that they solve.
Are you kind of open to those which problem they're trying to solve? So like, or is there a couple of areas if someone brings a deal to you or to the firm and you're saying, okay, kind of an alarm bell goes off in your head, say, this is a space I know it's just about to blow up. We're just looking for the right way in,
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting, especially in the context of COVID-19. But for example, for a very, very long time, if somebody came to me with a proposition that was kind of software that they were going to sell into public health services, I'd have run a mile, right? Because if you like, technology insertion in public health services is just a really, really hard problem, incredibly long sales cycles, kind of issues in terms of the change management of the introduction of the software, everything from kind of union related issues that just make it really, really hard. And, so that's kind of an area where, and within Draper Esprit, the approach that we took, we're huge, huge believers in digital health. And we probably have one of the greatest, European digital health investors in the team, a guy called Vishal Galati. But the approach that we took was that we were focused on opportunities that effectively bypassed the national health systems because they were just too difficult to penetrate and too difficult to kind of sell into, I think COVID may actually change that. We've seen a massive change in the level of inertia in the health systems, and if you think of things like video consultation, that technology has been there for the best part of 10 years and has hardly been adopted at all. I think we'll look back on that and kind of say, how did we ever think this was a good idea to collect kind of 15 random sick people in the same small room while they wait to see their GP? I mean, really.
I've been thinking about that for years. When I'm sitting there and people are coughing and stuff like that, and I'm just going into
Luke's a hypochondriac.
Yeah, maybe a little bit, but it's definitely something that crossed my mind and said, "This is like this was before COVID, but it's like this is crazy. This is like a petri dish that we're waiting in."
Yeah.
Everyone's
Absolutely,
doing the same things and filling.
And then you go in and kind of 9 times out of 10, you sit there and you have a chat with the GP, and they don't need to physically touch you or physically examine you an awful lot of the time, and they write out a wet ink script, and hand it to you, and you go to the chemist. I mean, it's crazy,
I didn't even know until recently that my health insurance actually had a virtual doctor as part of it for free.
Yeah.
So there's a monetary saving there as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. I think the first time I ever saw that, I was I just moved to Canada, and the guy was outside. In Canada, the marijuana is legal there, semi-legal, whatever. So like all the guys would be outside their shops trying to get people in to see the doctor to get a prescription, but the doctor was just on a screen, and then you just tell him what's wrong with you, and then he goes, "Yeah, sure, that sounds good to me." But I've never seen that. So maybe the companies that are on the fringes are early adopters to these type of things, you know. But Mark, we're coming up to an hour here. So this is when we usually bring in some of Mark's questions here to compare to some of our other guests and all that type of stuff. But maybe just one more question for me, just to pick your brain on a topic. If you were, so 25, 30, you had a little bit of experience working in a tech company or something like that, what area would be is it health the biggest opportunity that you can get into quickly? Obviously the most biggest things like that is going to affect everybody, global warming, all that type of stuff, or climate change. But that's I think it's such a big problem to try to solve. You know, what if there was just one industry? There's probably a lot of them. Is there one industry where you'd say this is worth spending my time for the next 10 years?
Well, I think digital health, definitely. You know, I mean, I think that again speaks to the issues around kind of aging population and the potential that's going to create. I also think you know, climate change and, you know, response to climate change is going to be an area of enormous opportunity over the next number of years. I also believe that, if you like, enabling remote working and the tools that are needed to kind of facilitate that are going to be huge. And you know, it's not just things like communication tools like Zoom. That's only part of the picture. You have, and again, a company that I'm an angel investor, Boundless. What they're doing is enabling companies to legally and in a compliant way employ somebody in the Czech Republic, you know, and that even a small company is going to need to be able to do that to operate effectively as a kind of remote business. So there's a whole set of problems there that I think are going to be gold dust for companies. Education is another space that I think is enormously underpenetrated by technology. And again, I think COVID-19 has been a bit of a wake-up call there. We've seen the kind of whole disaster area that the kind of the Leaving Cert has been. So I think there's a lot of potential in the education space. You know, there really is no shortage of opportunity. The other thing just to mention there, I'm always a little bit kind of suspicious of, if you like, the MBA approach to being an entrepreneur, which is kind of, you know, I'm going to graduate, I'm going to work for 2 years. Then I'm going to go back and do my MBA. Then I'm going to work for McKinsey for 3 years, and then I'm going to start my first business, you know. And that produces a business plan that sort of says, we scoured the market and we found the most profitable market opportunity, and we're going to go after that. That rarely produces great results. You know, I think the entrepreneur does need a kind of a connection to the problem. So, I mean, if you're working in a big tech company right now and you're thinking about, you know, I want to start my own business, I'd be doing two things. I'd firstly be thinking about, what am I personally passionate about? Right, and are there opportunities in the space that I'm really passionate about? And secondly, I'd be talking to my customers, my existing customers, asking about them, about their problems and their pain points. You know, I've always felt that one of the best ways to uncover an opportunity is through, you know, really close interaction with customers, you know. And it'll often be you'll uncover an opportunity which isn't an opportunity for your existing business. Do you know what I mean? In fact, the second company that I started, which I co-founded with a guy called Gary Maroney, who's just a fantastic entrepreneur. We'd been doing some work in the first business for the Irish Credit Bureau, systems for them, which were essentially early AI-based systems for identifying credit records that applied to an individual. And I realized that fundamentally the problem that they had was actually a data quality problem, and that there was an opportunity to create, if you like, a data quality platform, which was quite generic, right? Now, that wasn't the business that we were in at all, right? But I identified that problem because I was just talking to a customer about, what was hurting them and what was killing them. And that was the thing that enabled the identification of a very, very generic problem.
Absolutely. I think that's a great tip as well. Because I remember one of my customers in Iceland. They had a product exactly like that, where they worked in some cold logistics. So the software that tracks like the frozen fish being shipped all over the world, all that type of stuff. And they came up with an idea because they couldn't get the data that they wanted out of the systems that they had bought. So they had this really simple idea that was actually it's almost like a spreadsheet plug-in for that industry. And they've raised 2 million. They're doing incredibly well. Everyone wants that. And it's a very simple plug for the gap that they saw. So I love that type of stuff. So there you go. Hey, Mark, what's the story with those questions there? We'll get Brian back to his Saturday here.
Yeah, just kind of quick, easy questions, some of them. But you can elaborate on the answers if you like. So what would be the apps on your phone that you use the most?
Google Maps. Use it just absolutely all the time. WhatsApp. Up till relatively recently, I'd have been using Flight Radar 24 a huge amount. Haven't had much cause to use that recently. It's one of the things that's always bugged me. The kind of flight information that's available in airports is so shit. You'd be told your flight is delayed by 15 minutes. Check Flight Radar 24, and you kind of realize that the outbound hasn't even left Dublin. That used to just bug the hell out of me. So yeah, those would probably be some of the email, of course.
Surely there's an opportunity there to integrate the kind of that app into airports. Or
I think they're trying to manage it, Mark. I think they're just trying to keep everyone calm with the 15 minutes. If they say,
okay. Yes, I think that's true.
That's actually the second time that app has come up as an answer. What's the best idea you've never acted upon? I don't know if you want to give it away.
So I have I've had this startup idea for many years that I think is a really, really good idea. And it's kind of tough to explain, because what I wanted to do was to merge kind of tour apps, guided tour apps, with user-generated content, and effectively, if you like, target the kind of the long tail. Like, I think, to give you a simple example, there are people in Ireland who are really, really interested in railways, and they're obsessive about railways. And I'd love to be able to give them a really, really simple app that enables them to kind of record, if you like, a guided tour of Dublin focused on trains, and essentially provide a platform that enables them to record those, but also to distribute them and to choose to monetize them if they want, right? And the idea is not just to target kind of the professional tour tour leaders or whatever, but to also target that long tail of kind of enthusiasts, if you like, rather than, you know, the kind of the more conventional, you know, historical tour of Dublin, you know, that kind of thing. And various people have targeted aspects of that problem, like they've sort of gone after aggregating existing guided tour content, that type of thing. They've gone after sort of aggregating the providers of walking tours and that kind of thing. But I actually think that there's a much bigger opportunity there. I did try to get that one going by remote control, if you like, in to find a co-founder, and I found a woman who was just absolutely incredible. And, you know, it was kind of a case of, look, I'm not messing around here. I got to give you half the company. So, you know, we'll be co-founders. But I think what I realized was that she didn't have the vision that I had of exactly what the opportunity was, and actually I'm still in reasonably regular contact with her. She's just an incredibly impressive person, but we mutually came to the conclusion that it wasn't going to work. So that's kind of still on the shelf. And even though I probably first thought of that 10 years ago, I still don't think anybody has put the pieces together in the right way.
Okay. Cool, Mark. So I'll put together a business plan now, Mark. And
if you could do a business anywhere in the world, where would it be? So where do you think the best place in the world is to do business? Maybe it's remotely now, but
yeah, I mean, I think Ireland has many assets and many deficiencies as a location to do business. You know, I think the US has a fantastic environment in terms of access to capital and ease of doing business and so on. So I mean, I think the US is a great place to do business. I think as a society, it's so challenged in an awful lot of ways that I'm not sure I'd want to live there. I mean, similarly, if I think of the UK, London is an absolutely phenomenal international city. They have fantastically supportive schemes to enable early stage companies to raise capital, all that kind of thing. But again, I'm not sure I'd want to live in London. And I think increasingly people will think much more about that. They'll think about, you know, where do I want to live? What's the lifestyle I want to have, and what sort of society do I want my kids to grow up in? And that, I think, ends up being kind of more of a driver, and maybe why remote, I think, is going to be the next fit, Silicon Valley.
Yeah, which is great. Is it who you know or what you know?
It's a combination of both. You know, if I think of, you know, my family, but both my parents grew up in council houses, so they were not people who were in any sense kind of connected or anything like that. They were incredibly committed to education. And, you know, I think in terms of how do you bring people out of poverty, I think there are two things that give you real leverage: education and entrepreneurship. But, you know, relationships matter. Relationships really matter. And I think, you know, put time into building relationships with people, and that will always matter.
Good answer. Okay, last two. If you could advise someone to learn one skill, what would it be?
Learn to sell. You know, even if you are the technical founder or co-founder of a company, you are in the business of persuasion all day, every day. One of the best things that I ever did was do a sales training program, and I'd encourage, any entrepreneur, whether you're the sales guy, the person leading technology, it doesn't matter. You're in the business of persuasion and persuading people to join the team, persuading customers, persuading people to stay. There is almost no more important skill in my view.
So many
great
people had that answer as well. It's been we've lost our background there as well. It was falling down when we were anyway. So Mark,
okay, last one. What book would you recommend to the 18-year-old you?
The 18-year-old me. So I probably would recommend a book that I probably didn't read until I was like 25 or 26. Which is called How We Know What Isn't So, and the subtitle is The Fallibility of Human Reason in Everyday Life. And I would describe it as being a little bit like an early version of Thinking Fast and Slow, but I believe it's, and in fact, Daniel Kahneman refers to the book and to the author many times in Thinking Fast and Slow, but I think it's much more practical, much more digestible, and it kind of really exposes you to the kind of the mistakes people make in terms of how they think about things. And actually, I think that's something that has been exposed massively in an awful lot of the hype around kind of COVID-19 data and so on, So I think that's a book that if you really believe you're a smart person, you should read that book.
Great answer.
It's one that we haven't come across as well, so might dig into that, Mark, as well. But we have one more. Are we all good?
That's it. That's
it. Perfect.
Yeah.
Brian, we'd like to thank you very much for coming along to the SharkPod here. It gave our listeners a real view into something that in Ireland, it's still, I know we're talking about VC being there since the mid-90s, but it's still kind of a mystery to a lot of people as well, even people that are starting businesses. We see the Silicon Valley stuff, we listen to those podcasts, but it's important to know that this type of thing is available here in Ireland as well.
It absolutely is, and there's some really good quality venture capital firms here in Ireland now. There's also some rather poor ones, but there's some really good quality teams and people involved in the venture capital industry.
Perfect. So I might ask you to send us an email with the poor ones. We'll try to avoid them in the future. Won't name any names. But thanks very much.
If you're raising money, come and talk to me, and I might have an off the record conversation.
Perfect. When we get that idea, we'll make sure to drop by your office unannounced. Just pop in. All right. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks,
Brian.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.